Welcome to the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast, bringing you the latest updates from the world of sports, gambling, and pop culture. Because you can't have a show without hot takes or a Tiger King meme these days. Know what I'm saying? Now, with over 200 episodes and ready to get after it again, here's your host, Dwayne Callender.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for listening in. We're going to talk about the week that was for NFL Week 15 and talk about championship week for fantasy football as well coming up. A lot to kind of digest and piece through because with this being the holiday season, Christmas right around the corner, the NFL schedule is all over the place. You've got the first game starting on Friday on Christmas Day. You got a couple of Saturday games, and then obviously Sunday, and then a Monday night game. So you got multiple days of games going on. But let's talk about Week 15 because this is something, and it's very important to kind of digest. I wasn't able to get to this because of late breaking news, but you know, it decided a lot of fantasy football matchups, and it's just a lesson learned when you're kind of going through stuff about staying on top of things, because that can mean the difference between winning and losing in certain contests, whether it's daily fantasy or actual season-long fantasy. We did have news, and I'll even talk about what it impacted me for DFS purposes, because my DraftKings and FanDuel lineups were very much impacted by late breaking news that I was trying to resist, and it ended up costing me. But I'll explain why what the thought process was. All right, so in terms of Week 15, you had some major upsets that went down, and part of it was due to the Jets actually winning a game and beating the Rams, which cost them, in all likelihood, Trevor Lawrence because of Trevor's schedule. I get into that as well, but here's the thing about that game. Because the Rams were trailing throughout the entire game, the Rams were never ahead. The Jets won wire to wire. It's one of the most random bets you'll ever see. But throughout the course of the year, the Jets had been one of the most efficient teams in scoring on their first drive. So actually, Jets score first is one of the most efficient bets in the entire NFL season, even though the Jets had been winless the entire year up until that point. But the one thing I will say about that, above all else, is the fact that, you know, you had this game where the Rams were 17-point favorites. Cam Akers was a chalk pick for many people from daily fantasy sports. So it wasn't me, but there were many other folks touting that. And also from a season-long fantasy, Cam Akers was basically considered a lock RB1 to plug into lineups. And the logic made sense. The Jets were winless. The Rams are a run-first team. Cam Akers had established himself as the lead back. And so they were just going to run it down the Jets' throat ad nauseum, lather, rinse, repeat. Sounds simple. When the Rams went behind and still couldn't get anything going because Jared Goff just could not do anything to save his life, that changed the entire dynamic of the games. Like it just did. There really wasn't anything left to say. When the numbers ended up breaking down, and you kind of go through it, Cam Akers ended up being He did get hurt during the course of the game, but, with his original projections, Cam Akers was projected to be in that 15 to 16 point range, depending on your scoring site. But, that was a good chunk of change. Cam Akers barely got 6 points before he got hurt. And he did play a good portion of that game. So it's not as though he got hurt early. He played a good portion of the game. It's just that the Rams just couldn't do anything on offense. So what happened with some other news? 2 pieces of information that I came across. Ezekiel Elliott for the Cowboys got ruled out, which meant Tony Pollard got the start. And that was a big piece of news. Because as much as I just kind of looked at it, I still thought with San Francisco's defense, it wasn't significant enough news to move the needle. Even with their injuries, I thought the 49ers defense against a banged up Cowboys offensive line had the advantage there. I really didn't think it was going to be that significant of news. It ended up being disastrous for me. Other piece of news: Chase Edmonds getting activated. Now, who's Chase Edmonds, you may ask? Chase Edmonds is a running back for the Arizona Cardinals. And some of you are going to be saying, but I thought Kenyon Drake was the main running back for the Arizona Cardinals. There's the devil in the details. Before Chase Edmonds got hurt, Kenyon Drake was slowly being shifted out of the offense. I ended up kind of getting caught with this news on Chase Edmonds because, I was still kind of following the 1 o'clock games. I really didn't pay close enough attention to Chase Edmonds getting cleared and being told that he's full ready to go. I kind of looked at it from the standpoint of, I thought he got cleared, but I thought it was more of a, we made him active, but, realistically, he's going to be more of a decoy. Like, I really didn't do enough due diligence on how clear he was in terms of taking back more ownership of that offense, because as it kind of stood out, Edmonds was getting a little bit more traction the way things played out. So what does that actually mean in terms of the way the actual scenario broke down? It meant from a value standpoint, from DFS purposes, Tony Pollard put up over 30 points. And, convincingly put it up over 30 points because he had 2 touchdowns on 12 yards, 12 carries, 69 yards, 2 touchdowns. But he also caught 6 passes for 63 yards, 9 targets, 6 catches, 63 yards. I mean, you dream about those kinds of days for your RB1. To get that from the backup, the thing that was a backbreaker is that Tony Pollard was 5,200 on DraftKings FanDuel pricing wise. Hold on, I had this up before, but FanDuel pricing. Yes, that's right. He was even cheaper on FanDuel. He was only 4.7 on FanDuel, and I mean, I oftentimes talk to you guys about with daily fantasy sports. Sometimes it's not about the players. Sometimes it's just about the mathematics of managing the budget and the opportunity cost. The thing was, I just kind of pushed aside Tony Pollard because I really thought that the Niners defense was going to be still mostly in control of that matchup. Not having any shares of Tony Pollard is just disastrous It was just a disastrous play by me. I should have at least accounted for that in some of my lineups. That's a mistake on my part. Just because from an downside standpoint, I could have at least made a little bit of a transition between some of my breakdown, because the news came out an hour before it came out, so there was still time to make adjustments. And that's where you start seeing, in terms of skill level, like more savvier veterans will make that adjustment. I just kind of made the assessment that people were going to pivot to Pollard, but I really didn't think it was going to matter all that much. Ended up backfiring. But, thought process wise, I understood the value of it. I just really wanted to kind of go in a different direction. It just didn't pan out. What can be considered a lesson learned is just in terms of number of entries and playing a different style, what I could have done more was hedge against the news by playing some additional lineups. If I built them out in that last hour, that would have mitigated the damage in a way, because I felt really good about my lineups. But that kind of news is impactful enough that it should bear in mind. So, that's just kind of lesson learned for me. But just for you guys in general, the downside of certain scenarios not playing out can be detrimental. So from where my fault in the lineup construction ended up being on focusing so much on a game stack, where a lot of things can go wrong, but really the conditions I thought were pertinent to what was sizing out to be a slate breaking kind of game. And that was the Saints Chiefs game, where high total in the low 50s, a lot of action coming in on the betting on the over. You got it in a dome. You had Drew Brees returning. You obviously have Patrick Mahomes in the Chiefs offense. There were a number of scenarios that should have played out in terms of a very high-scoring game. What we didn't know is that Drew Brees was nowhere near close to 100%, despite reports from, Ian Rappaport, bruh, you got to be taking some else, man. It's like, you can't be misreporting bad news time after time after time and not take any flack for it. I mean, I don't know what the Saints told Rappaport, but there's no way Breeze was 100%, and he reported it as such. I mean, it's just bad. Just bad. There's no getting around it. There's no way Breeze had any business being out there on Sunday. And the fact is, the Saints have Jameis Winston right there. The Saints have a viable quarterback in Jameis Winston, who technically is their best option at this point, because Breeze, his ribs look compromised. You could tell he could not throw down the field, even more than before. He is compromised. Taysom Hill cannot run an offense. We've seen that story play out enough times. I could tell that's part of the reason why they rushed Breeze back, but he ain't ready to go, folks. Like, the Saints realistically may need to start seriously contemplating playing Jameis Winston weeks 16 and 17 right now. You got games against Minnesota. You got the Saints are the first game on Friday. Realistically, there should be a Jameis Winston start on Friday, at least to give Breeze a little bit more time to recover. And then week 17, you got a game against Carolina. Maybe that could be the get-right spot for Breeze, but he ain't ready yet. He clearly isn't ready yet. And that wasn't rust. That was, I'm physically impaired. I can't do this right now. Like, it's just that simple. So, to me, the choice is simple. It's Jameis Winston week 16 and 17, and hope Breeze is ready for the playoffs. You've given the Taysom little experiment enough time. Like, it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. It just impairs the entire offense. and even still, they gave attempts to Taysom when he didn't deserve it, and yeah, they barely lost to the Chiefs. But man, like again, an actual well prepared Saints offense could have won that game. The defense played well enough to win that game for them, despite giving up 32 points. I thought the Saints defense played excellent against the Chiefs. That was part of the reason why the game stack went by the wayside, because the Saints defense played so well that it really did limit the volume for the Chiefs. So, yeah, all things considered, you know, you hit the over barely, but the Saints defense played well. DFS wise, the Chiefs players did not have a good day. Mahomes, while not frosty, did not light the world on fire. Tyreek Hill was a buzz. Like it was a very painful game stack for me on Sunday. But that's how it goes sometimes. But from a fantasy perspective, what did go off? Again, I told you about the late breaking news with Pollard and Chase Edmonds being so cheap. You had Savon Ahmed for Miami also putting up numbers. Like the late scratches is something you have to be mindful of as you approach the late season windows, as teams have less to play for. That's why I don't take a lot of stock in Christian McCaffrey news at this point, because we've been through this story enough times. Like, if he wasn't ready to go yet, why is he coming back for week 16 and 17? Like, at this point, it's just Mike Davis and just live with it. I just don't see it. I really don't see it. So, from my standpoint, it's just one of those cases where it kind of ends up being a wash. I just think, truth be told, this ends up being a case where, you've got quite a bit of news to kind of be mindful of for the next 2 weeks, because it can change certain slates on a dime, as it did on Sunday. Because realistically, what ended up being the Millie Maker lineup, hinged on that news. So kind of walking back through the slates, both DraftKings and FanDuel, I'll tell you what the Millie Maker lineups were, because it ended up being a case where, again, reaction to late breaking news and just taking advantage of it. So, all right, so here's the $1 million lineup on DraftKings. At QB, you've got Jalen Hurts at 5,900, and yeah, it's just a monster game against the Cardinals, who, terrible defense. But, again, with DFS, you don't care about the actual player itself so much as the matchups he's going up against. But Hurts, he completed his short passes. Yards at the catch was big for the receivers. But, hey, you get to be the beneficiary of that. He didn't scramble as much as he did previously with the 63 rushing yards, but when you throw for over 300 yards, that kind of takes care of itself. But, the Cardinals were bad, but I look at Hurts again as a viable option next week in overall fantasy. This is one of those things where, you kind of ride the hot hand, and you can't necessarily get as caught up on certain things. But I'll get to regular fantasy in a bit. But just kind of going down the lineup for DraftKings again, Hurts at QB. He was in the optimal 5,900. In terms of this Millie Maker lineup, you had David Montgomery, 7,000 on DraftKings, 32 points, just 2 rushing TDs. That's basically the story. Ran for 140 yards. Like, I saw lineups where David Montgomery beat out Dalvin Cook in fantasy playoffs. No way anyone would ever say that Dalvin Cook would actually get outperformed in a game by David Montgomery, but here we are. DeAndre Swift, running back for the Lions, 6,400, put up 23 points. And it wasn't even that he had a monster day catching the ball. I mean, 2 rushing TDs. Sometimes it's just opportunity cost. The Lions were getting blown out by the Titans, and yet still DeAndre Swift ended up in the optimal. Like, I wasn't on him because I figured Derrick Henry was going to smash the Lions defense. This game would be out of reach. Why would I play a running back in a catch-up spot with the Lions? But the Lions still kept feeding Swift the ball even though they were down 4 touchdowns. Some of these teams, I give up trying to explain it with logic. It doesn't really track. This was the decision point for me that got me burned. Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins. I went with certain lineups with DeAndre Hopkins when I was playing Hurts. It was actually my best lineup overall, all things considered. But I'll get into why my lineups failed. Calvin Ridley actually outperformed DeAndre Hopkins, but DeAndre Hopkins, depending on the site, outperformed Calvin Ridley. Again, this is where scoring format makes a difference. DeAndre had 34 points on DraftKings. We'll get to FanDuel in a moment. Calvin Ridley had 35.3 points on DraftKings. They both had a touchdown. DeAndre had 169 yards receiving versus 163 for Ridley. Again, that's going to make a difference because of the scoring formats. But yeah, they both had monster games without question. But, with DraftKings, because you get the extra point and the yardage bonuses, it does give them, those 2 receivers, a boost over the rest of the competition because, not everybody got to the 100-yard mark from a receiving standpoint. Obviously for the top lineups, but, Corey Davis was one. 5,800 was not on. Again, I was on the Derrick Henry portion of this. I was not focusing on game stacking the passing attack for Tennessee versus passing with the Lions. Again, you have to think about different game scripts, and this was the kind of game script that was in mind here. I see where they were going. So you have Corey Davis. You run it back with DeAndre Swift on the Lions, as well as Marvin Jones, who was 5,700 on DraftKings. He had a nice day, 10 receptions, 112 yards, and a receiving touchdown. I mean, 30 points from a 55K player. I mean, you're talking tremendous value. Then we get to the tight end spot. This is where I really got hurt, focusing on Kelsey so much. Not that he had a bad game, but with the price tag, that's what it comes down to. Logan Thomas had the best day amongst the tight ends, 26 points at 4K salary. All Dwayne Haskins did for that game was check down to Logan Thomas, and I should have seen it. I was playing McLaurin, Terry McLaurin, and I should have been thinking more about Logan Thomas, and that's something that really irks me because I've been on Thomas a lot this year, and I wasn't on him this week, and I should have seen it with Seattle's secondary. I thought the play was McLaurin, and realistically, Haskins couldn't get it done down the field of McLaurin. He checked it down to Logan Thomas, and that made all the difference. That one burns. Just because I was on Thomas so much this year, and I was definitely underweight on him this week. but 26 points for Logan Thomas. In the flex spot, played Darnell Mooney for the Bears. 3,900, which is pretty much the rationale for playing him. At the salaries, you're kind of running down the line of how much money you got left on the roster. At 3,900, still had enough room to actually play Emmanuel Sanders, which was the chalk play, but Mooney came in under 3% owned. Sanders 20% owned, which is where I went because I was game stacking the Chiefs Saints game. Sanders, put up 11 points. Like, there's nothing wrong with what Emmanuel Sanders did. It's just that that's not going to win you a huge pot at a tournament. Darnell Mooney, 16 points, receiving touchdown, couple of catches. That'll get it done at 4K. Pretty much at 3,900. That's what you're looking for. And then finally, for defense, there were better defensive options. They could have played the Cowboys, but went with the Seahawks, and I'm guessing is because he was expecting turnovers from Dwayne Haskins, which we certainly got on Sunday. 2 picks, a couple of sacks for the Seahawks defense, 9 points. But overall, total score of 237, and that will get it done. In certain weeks, and for a Millie Maker lineup, and it kind of comes down to the thought process of sometimes you gotta space it out in a different way to get to the pricing you're looking for. Now, over on FanDuel, what we came across was the fact that again, you're talking about different matchups and what can make sense as you're going through the process. And, again, Tony Pollard is where this is factoring in, and I still get nightmares on this one. Jalen on FanDuel, Jalen Hurts, 6,900 on FanDuel, which I played. I had Jalen Hurts. That wasn't the issue. Did very well. Just because from a saving standpoint, I had fewer options on FanDuel, and I thought Jalen Hurts made sense. 6,900, very profitable there. Where I got crushed, again, is paying up for Derrick Henry at 10.2. Not that Derrick Henry did poorly, because he still scored 24 points. The problem is he got beat out by 3 other players. Got beat out by Dalvin Cook, who was 9,400. And, again, Tony Pollard, 4,700 on FanDuel. Even cheaper on FanDuel, 28 points. And David Montgomery, again, 7.3. So 7,300. 20, again, another 28 points. From a roster construction standpoint, they were so much cheaper that it just puts you in a very difficult spot in terms of being able to compete, because from a pricing standpoint, you really struggle to get there. And where I kind of fell short, just in the grand scheme of things, I just didn't see where you were fitting in DeAndre Hopkins and Travis Kelce, whom I was playing on FanDuel. Thing of it was, if you had switched over to Tony Pollard and I wasn't exploring that possibility, you could have fit in both DeAndre Hopkins and Travis Kelce, which is what the Millie Maker lineup actually ended up doing. So in terms of the actual breakdown of the lineup for the Millie Maker, you had Hurts, Pollard, Montgomery. Fournette was just cheap, at 5,500. That was a popular play. But you could have also played Savon Ahmed. Again, injury news, Ahmed being the Dolphins running back because Myles Gaskin couldn't clear COVID precautions. And again, it's going to be a waiver wire target this week. That made sense numbers-wise. But because of the value you could get at running back because of the late-breaking news, you're able to fit in Marvin Jones at 6,100 and DeAndre Hopkins at 8,600 on FanDuel, who, DraftKings, you could try to squeeze in DeAndre Hopkins. FanDuel, really hard to squeeze in DeAndre Hopkins, so I wasn't on him at all on FanDuel and, didn't take enough time to explore the value options of making this work. Robert Woods had a big day, 7,400 on FanDuel. You wouldn't necessarily think of Robert Woods as being a big scorer, but the way the game script went for the Rams, being behind on the Jets, a lot more passing opportunities, and he was the beneficiary as opposed to Cooper Kupp. Usually with the Rams, if it's a passing game for them, it's either Kupp or Woods, but they both usually don't get there. So, again, food for thought as you're building out lineups. And again, Travis Kelce, you want that salary floor at tight end. Kelce was the highest scoring tight end yet again, 8,500 though on FanDuel, but you wanted that floor. But the other scorer was Lance Thomas, again, 16 points. He would have only cost you 5,600, and maybe you find other places to get different. But on the Millie Maker lineup, Kelce was in there, and again, along with David Montgomery. I got burned again by Montgomery. I'm probably going to get burned again this week because I just don't see him getting there. Maybe I should jump on board the train, but I'm not there. I'm just not there, and that's probably going to cost me. But sometimes you just got to look at some of the matchups, and I didn't think Montgomery really had that great of a matchup against the Vikings, and I think it's more the same this week. I just don't think it's a great running matchup against the Jags. Now, I know some of you are going to be saying, Dwayne, the Jags are terrible. Why wouldn't it be a good matchup against the Bears? Here's the thing. The Jags give up points everywhere. It's not just that they're bad on the ground. They're bad covering in pass attempts. Like, the potential, you're still going to play David Montgomery in regular fantasy. No doubt. There are going to be touchdown opportunities there. What I'm saying is, from a DFS perspective, his pricing is going to be through the roof this weekend because he's in the 7K range, and he's going to be popular. I know he's going to be popular. But David Montgomery still does not have the long-term effect to be priced at the 7K range that I'm going to feel comfortable with playing him, because if I'm playing him in the 7K range, I got to feel very confident that he's going to get there. I had a difficult enough time getting there with Jonathan Taylor, and it took a matchup against a putrid, really just a putrid Texans run defense, and still he wasn't necessarily there. So it's not a gimme. It's not a gimme with some of these matchups. Certainly can happen. I'm not going to get there, but when your past performance over your last 15 games, David Montgomery has underperformed expectations over 50% of the time. Like, from a consistency standpoint, that's not a strong suit. You're looking for the higher tier guys, you're probably looking closer to a 60% conversion rate, which is more in the range of you would see out of Dalvin Cook. Derrick Henry consistently has been either a bust or a boom the entire year. So the 50-50 goes into Derrick Henry kind of camp. But realistically, when you're putting in your running back for DFS purposes, you want to have a higher conversion rate of over 60%. And again, you're not going to have that much, too many guys, just because 2020 has been all over the place in terms of the running back rankings. I mean, the days of getting that consistency with certain backs are long gone. It's like, it would have been Kamara this year. It should have been Kamara this year. if it wasn't for Taysom Hill. Really would have been Kamara being the most consistent fantasy production back all year. But, it is what it is. All right, so just quick thoughts on the upcoming slate, because we got Saturday and Sunday games. For the Saturday games, I'm looking more towards targeting Kyler Murray and DeAndre Hopkins for that triple header on Saturday. Probably squeezing Darren Waller at tight end. We'll see what the Miami running back situation is. I'm not entirely certain that, with Miami having the possibility of the playoffs on the line, if they don't try to rush back Myles Gaskin. But if Gaskin can't get cleared, Ahmed is an absolute lock. And for certain, I'm playing just Chase Edmonds this week at running back. He's good to go. So I'm definitely going to be playing him this week. In terms of the Sunday matchups, this is where it gets kind of interesting because they finally priced up Jalen Hurts across the board. And, I kind of look at it from the standpoint of, now the value is starting to leave a bit. So I don't necessarily think you have to go down that road with Jalen Hurts. The argument made a lot more sense, last week. This week, it's a little harder. It's a little harder to get there, at least from where I sit right now. Maybe some of the news changes later in the week, but I just look at it from the standpoint of you got Patrick Mahomes against Atlanta. You can play Patrick Mahomes naked if you want with no receivers if pricing's an issue, but I think you can play Mahomes with Kelsey and be fine with that pairing, or Mahomes and Tyreek Hill, also possible. But if you're not going Mahomes in the passing game, then you absolutely should be having Le'Veon Bell at running back for the Chiefs with Clyde Edwards-Helaire injured and not being able to kind of go in. That actually leads into another side commentary that I didn't get to with the Steelers not signing Le'Veon Bell during the year. That should have happened, but now the Steelers have themselves to blame. But we'll get into that as we get into the picks at some point. But definitely like Teddy Bridgewater and Carolina against Washington. He gives you an opportunity to do a run back with Logan Thomas. I think there's definitely value in some of these plays this week going down that route. So definitely going to be exploring Carolina stacks against Washington. I don't think they're going to be able to run on Washington necessarily because of that Washington defensive line, but I do think there's going to be opportunities to throw the ball down the field against that secondary. So definitely like Carolina this week. Also like Houston against Cincinnati. Cincinnati got that big win Monday night. They are well overdue for a letdown on Sunday and getting smoked by the Texans. So definitely like the possibility of stacking Deshaun Watson and his receiving options against Cincinnati. So, that's kind of where I'm at the moment. But, again, with fantasy and the championship on the line, just the thoughts I would say is be mindful of injury news because it's more of a bigger issue with week 16 and 17. But it came up as week 15 with lots of injury news shifting the dynamic in the favor of teams that were able to spring upon that. So definitely something to bear in mind as we head into the championship weekend. So definitely keep your eyes peeled for news and notes. The Washington situation with Dwayne Haskins is something to kind of bear in mind because Dwayne Haskins, it seems, is going to be suspended because he had strippers over for a party. I swear, it's 2020 and these guys still don't get what's going on. I can't. But, it's something to be mindful of, because if you have Haskins getting suspended, Alex Smith is out injured with the calf, but Kyle Allen still technically is on IR. I don't know what Washington ends up doing. The Giants may end up backdooring their way into that division anyway, but regardless, from a DFS purposes, it does change the dynamic as to who's going to be available to play against Carolina. Again, I look at the running back situation for Carolina. Is Christian McCaffrey coming back? So many factors are playing into the news that it's going to change it on the dime as to how the field's going to go. And, that's where opportunity can be made there, as was seen with the World Championships on the DFS slate this past weekend. So more to come. And until next time, folks, we'll get into some NBA talk as well. And that will be next time. But for now, have a good one and keep your eyes peeled.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Throwdown Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all other major outlets.